Welcome back, Troglodytes, to the Trogly's Guitar Show. Today, we're going to compare the brand new 2019 40th anniversary The Paul reissue to an original. So before I go into all the nitpicky little details that makes these instruments different, let's go ahead and compare their sound first. So with the clean tone test, it's very obvious that the reissue is a little bit louder, punchier, and snappier, and it really drives the amp a little bit more. That's pretty natural because the pickups in this one are a little bit hotter than in the original. However, that really comes down to amp settings as well. Something that I found really interesting though is that the original bridge pickup has this really nice bright chiminess to it, whereas the 498T in the reissue, it actually has a darker sound to it. The middle position of the original one was a lot more favorable to my ears. The pairing of the modern pickups doesn't quite have that same middle position tone that I'm used to. It's a little bit too harsh. So I think overall I preferred the original for clean tones. Now let's move on to the distorted test. Now when it comes to distortion, there's quite a difference. I would say the new one has a little bit better of sustain. It has a more driving and modern sound to it. Whereas that original kind of has that mellowy classic rock tone to it. So I think these instruments are very different in this category. Now running this through the Mesa Boogie, I think it favors the more modern sounding pickups. But I think this really comes down just to personal preference if you like that high gain type of sound or if you like your more mellow overdrive. Out of these tone samples, I think I actually preferred the Reissue. So which instrument did you prefer? Now let's review all the details of both of these instruments to see how they vary in construction. First things first here, the headstock size. The Norlin era of Gibson is known for having these large paddleboard-like headstocks. And as you can see in this back-to-back photo here, it is significantly larger. You can see the open book design on the Reissue is a little bit more extreme at the top. And take a look at the sides of the instrument. Notice how the original is much more curved in shape, whereas the Reissue, it appears more straight. There still is a very tiny curve there, but that is what really contributes to the Reissue's headstock looking much smaller. The Gibson logo itself is also slightly different because, well, they're different eras of Gibson when they use different looking ones. For example, the original, the dot in the I touches the G, whereas it is completely separate on the modern day version. These both have a truss rod cover that reads The Paul. The font is the same, but the Reissue is much thicker. You can definitely tell it on the end of the L of Paul because there's hardly any room for the loop on it, whereas the original, it's much easier to see it. As we had talked in the full review of this 2019 Reissue, there's a weird maple strip that covers the truss rod channel. I was surprised to see that the originals do also have that. However, the Norlin era was smart enough to stain it a walnut color so it doesn't stand out as much. Both of these instruments have a 3-piece walnut neck with a volute. Now the modern day volutes that Gibson are using, they're much more pronounced than the original style that they used in the 70s. You can see here it's just kind of a little bit of a bump, but the Reissue is definitely way more pronounced. Now you're going to notice the tuners are different. It's actually uncommon to find Schallers on the original of the Pauls, but they do exist. The majority of these got Grovers, so that's why Gibson chose those for this instrument. Both of them have a serial number as well as a Made in USA stamp. The original The Paul series featured an ebony fretboard with a first fret inlay. And the Reissue, they got a rosewood fretboard and they do not have a first fret marker. That's also true on the side, they didn't even put that little dot. Neck profile, they're both about the same in the 60s neck territory. I will say that the original has more of a flatter feeling curve to it, whereas this one is much more rounded. The frets are also slightly different. The original frets are low and wide. The new frets aren't super tall by any means, but they're not quite as wide, which kind of gives it a more modern day feel and can make it a little bit easier to bend. Both of the bodies for these instruments are pure walnut. The originals are multi-pieced. You can find them anywhere between 2 to 5 pieces, whereas most of these reissues that I've seen are a 2-piece center seam. The original The Pauls feature T-top pickups, which are very PAF-like, whereas the reissues, they decided to use the 490R 498T series. Now that makes this bridge pickup about twice as hot as the original, so in the playing demo, it was definitely easy to tell which one was the reissue. Both of these issues featured speed knobs with a toggle switch right by there. Not all of these had a poker chip. These were supposed to ship with one in the case if you wanted to add it. They both have a Nashville-styled bridge with a tailpiece. However, the Reissue has an Allen key adjustment post, which makes it easier to adjust your action with string tension on. Both of these have some carving along the edges, but here you can really see the differences between the two. The Reissue has a much more dramatic carve. It's a little bit deeper than the original one. You can also see it along the other side of the instrument here. The backs of these instruments have a very similar story with the comfort cut. It is much larger on the Reissue. You can see here on the original, it just kind of follows the edge, but this one, it kind of cuts into the guitar a little bit. Here's a good way to see the difference of that, how it cuts into the instrument. The back control plates, they might look the same, but they're actually very slightly different. An original plate will fit on a Reissue, but the screws will not line up. A Reissue plate will not fit on an original The Paul. You can also see inside of the cavities here that the Reissue has little nubs of wood, which helps prevent cracking, whereas the originals were not routed like that. The new ones also feature Gibson's PCB electronics and a traditional 3-way toggle switch, whereas the originals are hand-wired and has the SGL-shaped toggle switch. While we're talking about cavities, let's look under the pickups. In the original review for the Reissue model, I criticized Gibson a little bit because it looks like they used a dull routing bit for some of these areas. However, when compared to an original, it was definitely much more smoother. And walnut is a wood that is well known for dulling your bits very quickly. The strap button placement for the top one is very slightly different, and you can also see the buttons have changed since the original issue. Weight will vary example to example, but these ones were very similar. The Reissue was actually slightly heavier. And lastly, these are both finished in a satin nitro finish. So as you play these instruments, they will kind of naturally buff into a glossier finish, as you can see here on this original one. But notice the color difference. Now clearly this one's vintage, the clear coat has yellowed a little bit, but do you see how much darker this one is? If you really prefer that dark walnut vibe, I think the Reissue would make you happier. So in the end, each of these instruments has some pros and cons to it when you're comparing them side by side. Obviously, an original one at this point in time, if you're comparing to new prices, will be cheaper and likely give you a better investment value. However, as with any vintage instrument, you might need some fret work, you might have replaced parts that might make it not sound exactly like this one, and it's been used for many years. So if you're a person that has to have a brand new guitar and you don't want the germs of all these other people, maybe the new one would be better for you. As a super fan of the original series, I can definitely see owning one of each because they are vastly different guitars. I can't necessarily say which one is better because they are both excellent. But what I like about the reissues is they are very tried and true to the originals. And in many ways, they're better. You have a two-piece body, so it looks a little bit more traditional, but you still get this beautiful walnut wood grain. You can't expect Gibson to reissue T-tops to put in here. I probably would have went with like a 57 Classic combination to more closely suit the original T-top sound. But it's almost nice having this one be hotter than the original because that allows you to justify owning a different guitar. I mean, sure, you could say, well, why don't you just put a 490R, 498T in the original? And you could, but that's a whole nother video. So in the end, these are both excellent guitars. I would recommend both of them. This one being a limited edition, I'm betting they will hold value pretty darn well. Because if you look at like the L6S reissue guitars, those things still sell for more than an original. So I think picking one of these up, as long as Gibson only puts down production to like 400 or so, I think you'll be safe with this investment. But definitely pick one of these up if nothing else. So thank you, Troglodytes, for tuning in to this episode of the Paul comparison. I hope you learned something. Maybe it swayed you one way or the other, or hey, maybe now you're just buying both. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe, and we will see you tomorrow on the next episode. Take care.